Hey, this is Justin from Unitronics Tech Support, and today we're going to be going over the different types of firmware update options you have for updating your Unistream controller. So, all the updating of the firmware is done within our UniLogic software, so you're going to want to have the version of UniLogic for what you're trying to download on the firmware. So if you haven't already, you can go to our website, Software, UniLogic section, and download the latest version. Or if you're looking for an older version, come down to here and click on the previous versions. We have a couple older versions listed, and if you're looking for an older version than that, you can contact the technical support. Alright, so back over to UniLogic, and so the section for updating the firmware is within the PLC tab up here, and then all the way over to the right, Unistream Management. From here we can see the firmware section, and you have this option, update firmware. This is just to update the firmware within UniLogic on your computer, just to make sure you have the latest firmware on your file system. And then you can select either the firmware manager or remote update. So firmware manager is where you'll put the firmware files on a SD or USB stick that's connected to your computer. And remote update is if the SD or USB is connected to your PLC. So remote update tends to be easier if it's already connected to your PLC. It just makes things a little smoother. Otherwise, we can do the firmware manager here. And you can select copy to disk, or copy to dock. You can see the firmware version listed here. Make sure that's correct. Hit copy to dock. That warning will always pop up. That's fine. And so you can select the drive, make sure it's correct, and as well as the file system type needs to be FAT32. You see that's listed here. If it's not already on FAT32, you can format that with Windows or any other formatting tool. Just come over to a Windows Explorer, go ahead and right click on the device, and you can select the format option. Over here, file system, and select FAT32, and go ahead and format that. So once that's done, you can just hit OK to copy the firmware files. So all the firmware files are going to be copied over to your dock. So I already have some firmware on here. Just for example, you'll see the firmware is stored in the Unistream _files folder. You open that up and you see some files in here. That's good. So user app is actually if you have a application file, that's probably not going to be there for you. So that's that. Once that's done, you're going to need to load the firmware from the UniApps of your Unistream controller. So we'll go over that. But before doing that, we show you the remote update option. So remote update, you're going to need to be connected to the controller either via Ethernet or USB to mini connection. And then select your target drive here. You do dock, you do SD card, and it will tell you if the device is detected, and we'll perform the updates after it copies all the files. So those are your options, and this force checkbox is really if you're just downgrading your firmware, you're going to have to select the force option. Otherwise, if you're upgrading, you're fine. So once you have the firmware files on your USB stick, you go ahead and plug that into your panel. Go, it's plugged in, and then you're going to want to access UniApps. So there was an action file that was supposed to be on there, but that's fine. Just go here, hold the top right hand corner, go to UniApps. Once you're in the UniApps section, go to upgrades, and then you can select the upgrade from dock or update from SD. So you select this one for the dock. And you can see that it's already up to date. It's detected the files, but if I want to reinstall them, I can select the forced option and click the update firmware. Alright, so now we're going to go into alternate updating options. So for example, if you're using a USC, you're not going to be able to use the Unistream Management and Firmware Manager option unless you have a VNC connection to be able to access the UniApps on the PLC. So if if you don't have that VNC connection, what you do is use an action file. So if you go over to the top banner here and then the tools section, you'll see the USB action files creator, and click on that. And then you can select what you need to select in this section. So I recommend deselecting everything and then uncheck this box here as well. And go down to the update section. You'll see the option to update the PLC application and update PLC firmware here. So you can select both of these if you're looking to update both the application and firmware in one go. That is fine. And go ahead and save that to your USB drive. You'll copy the files over, and then you'll load the USB stick into the panel, and we'll go from there. Alright, so the process is you'll stick the USB stick into your panel. It should detect the action file. Just give it a minute here. And you'll see that this pops up, USB action file, and you'll have the option to start this file. Go ahead and start that. And it's just saying it needs to reboot, so that's fine. And it will go ahead and perform the updates. And so if you're upgrading the firmware with the USB action file on a USC, you're going to want to look at the USB indication lights. So once you insert the flash drive with the action file, you should see the USB light go solid green. This means that it's detected it successfully, and you can click the confirm button to start the action file, in which case you'll start to see the USB light blinking green, and will go solid green once the action has finished. Or potentially for like firmware updates, it will require a second confirm button when the run light is blinking green and the solid USB lights. So you see that this means that the system just needs to restart, and you just need to confirm that when these two conditions are met, and then it will continue to be in progress and go solid green when it's actually finished. So that's all you need to know for upgrading it with a USC unit. Alright, so there's one more option to download the firmware to your PLC. And that's from the download drop down. This is actually more for exporting your project file to USB, but you're able to include the firmware in this option as well. So the PLC tab, download drop down, and all the way at the bottom, export project and firmware to a file. See this selection. You select your drive here, make sure that's formatted correctly, and you'll have the option to include the firmware in this tab over here. So make sure you include the firmware. There you go. And that is good. And then we can go ahead and create this file. Make sure it's created. Alright, and so to upgrade the application and firmware, you just go to the UniApps, you get the upgrades in the top right. Then it is the upgrade app and firmware selection. You should see the files listed on either option.